So welcome. This is the EUI series on the crisis of experts' knowledge. I am Marco Colleoni, and today I am going to interview Zeynep Pamuk, who is a young but already very distinguished scholar. She earned her PhD in government from Harvard University, and then she went on with a position in Oxford, and she's currently teaching assistant in the University of associate professor in the University of California at San Diego. So yes, it is my pleasure to welcome you, Zeynep.
Thank you so much, Marco. Great to be here.
And I will go on with the first question following your presentation in the meeting. Yes, so as I was introducing you, your research has contributed to a matter of increasing relevance in social science over the last years, which is the struggle between expert and ordinary citizens. So the first thing that can come to somebody's mind when seeing this topic is, what is to you the cause of such disconnect between the two categories? Why have we seen this mountain this distrust between the two emerge in the last years?
There's a lot of talk, as you said, about increasing distrust of experts. And I think our understanding of the problem could maybe be enhanced by differentiating between different kinds of experts. So I think the reasons why trust or distrust accrues to an economist at the World Bank versus a civil servant versus an EU regulator or a research scientist are likely to be different, although there might be links. I focus on the relationship between science and politics. So I'll take the question about scientists as experts. And I think although we hear about science denial and distrust in scientists as well, actually in Western countries, trust in science and scientists still runs high, and it has been for decades. So it's pretty consistent, except perhaps on climate change in the US. And I think despite this ground trust in scientists, the reason why there can be a disconnect or disagreement or conflict over science is that it's not that people don't think scientists know what they're talking about when it comes to the science and their methods, but scientists themselves have values and commitments, a particular perspective, and their research is influenced by this in the way they select questions, in their framing of an issue, in concept definitions, in modeling assumptions. They make many assumptions. And this can result in findings that are skewed towards certain perspectives, certain purposes or ends that citizens might not share. And I think this is the source of friction. This is a source of friction, at least. During the COVID crisis, for example, public opinion surveys showed that many citizens agreed with the statement that scientists know what they're talking about and should be influential in the handling of the pandemic. But on the question, on a matter of life and death, would you trust scientists to share your values? About 50% either disagreed or said neither agree nor disagree. So I think this may be the source of the problem.
Right. So in this problem, you generally hold a conciliatory approach, right? Both in your papers and in your book, you seem to stand a little bit in the middle. So you call basically on the productive interaction of experts and citizens for the establishment of truth, of what should be indicated as that. And your main model of reference is, correct me if I'm wrong, the common law jury, which is a committee of citizens who must decide on an outcome after at least two opposing expert views have been scientifically shown to them. So your plan is to extend this to create a sort of science court, okay? But the question is, don't you fear that this might risk undermining the, however small and remaining trust in science we have if citizens are brought to systematically perceive it as unable to propose a conclusion, basically?
So your question and this widespread view rests on the assumption that science will be trusted if it can deliver certain and univocal answers. And I think that's a shaky or unstable grounds on which to base trust in science, because science, one of the advantages of science is that it recognizes its own fallibility, its uncertainty, and has mechanisms to respond to that. But to think that to the public, when science turns to the political realm, it must present itself as not being what it is, not having this kind of uncertainty and disagreement within it, I think that's just going to create an unstable situation. And empirically, there are studies of whether citizens trust science when they hear about its uncertainty. And it seems like this widespread view is not backed up by empirical research. Citizens acknowledge, when they're presented with uncertainty about certain facts, their trust in science does not seem to go down, which I think is reassuring, because science just isn't certain and infallible. So my interest is in finding institutions that recognize the limitations of science, share it with a public audience, but do it in a way that is institutionalized and present a good epistemic environment for citizens to sit back, to hear scientific experts speak, and make up their own minds. The public sphere, the media environment is often so polluted that it's very difficult to get this kind of healthy epistemic situation. So my proposal for a science court is meant to create a sane epistemic environment for citizens to hear about what science can and cannot do.
Right. So basically, you want to expose citizens to science and to what is really the process of science, which is not always, a certain truth, but something that is in the process of establishing something more each time. Right. So you then, in your book, you describe more the function in the details of what you call the science court, and like to sum up, this would be similar to the juries in trials, but with some slight difference. So the similarity is that each member would vote secretly, but in fact, the science court would not have the final word over the policy proposal, because then it would still be the representative to either abide with the recommendation of the science court or not. But then, in your opinion, what is the most compelling reason for not making the jurors explain their vote in public? So we have talked about, exposing the science to citizens, to ordinary citizens, and to make them dialogue with the persons of science. So don't you think that an institution such as the science court should follow the rule of science and then expect the jurors to justify their decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I see your point that this is a counterintuitive move to say that citizen jurors in a science court need not explain their reasoning. The simple reason that I opted for this argument is simplifying the process of engaging with expertise for citizens who simply don't have the kind of knowledge and technical vocabulary that experts have. I think this is a huge hurdle, an obstacle for citizen participation, that they are not going to be able to speak the same language, to write up a scientific report and justification, and it would be onerous to expect them to do that. So I recognize that this can have some dangers, but what I find reassuring is that the process itself would involve scientists justifying themselves. So there'd be opposing scientists explaining the case pro and con on a policy question. So the explanations would essentially be there, delivered by scientists in the most, in technical language, or technical language made accessible. And it would be understood that the jury is essentially deciding that this is more convincing. And they can choose from some simple reasons why. They can give a short explanation, but I think it would be prohibitive for them to explain themselves more. Actually, I'm inspired in this move by Matthew Landauer's historical analysis of ancient Greek democracy, where the demos was an unaccountable actor. And of course, when we vote, we don't explain why we vote for one party over another. So there are certain moments of unaccountable acting in a democracy by the citizens themselves. And this could be one of them. And finally, I will say this, as you mentioned, I don't give the science court jurors the right to make binding policy. So at the end of the day, they're delivering a recommendation. So representatives will take it or leave it. So there will be other places in the policy process where explanation and justification will be offered by those who maybe speak these technical languages. But the jurors, like jurors on a regular judicial jury, would not offer reasons for that.
Right. So this makes me switch a little bit the argument, because I was thinking about Condorcet's theorem. We are basically supposing that how to say the jurors are unbiased, okay? Because if we don't bind them to express their words, we are kind of confident that they are unbiased, that they can be convinced to what is best, okay? So my question on that is, we know that Condorcet's theorem works if at least half of the voters is more likely to vote correctly or unbiasedly than incorrectly. Would you agree then, in a more broader terms, in favor of direct democracy as instrumental to your conciliatory approach between science and ordinary citizens?
Not necessarily. And I think the reason is that I don't take the Condorcet or epistemic line for my arguments. So I think in an area that's very technical, it may be difficult to find ordinary citizens who will have a greater than 50% chance of getting the correct answer. But more importantly, I don't see the framing of the problem as getting the correct answer, because these jurors are not settling the science. They're not coming up with scientific truths, but they're deciding what to do on a scientific policy issue where the science is uncertain, there's disagreement, and there'll be different kinds of consequences to different mistakes. So this is essentially a political conflict about deciding what kinds of stakes we're more willing to take, what kinds of risks are we okay with, who should we inflict the risks upon. And I think these are issues that are open to disagreement among citizens with reasonable differences in values. So I don't take a truth-based approach. And given that, I don't think it's necessary to have a large number of citizens in a direct democracy situation. My argument is compatible with having representatives and parliaments and the whole structure of representative democracy, but these would be ways to bring in more citizens to participate, get more public input, so make it more participatory without necessarily leading to a complete transformation. I see the arguments for the difficulties of direct democracy, the burden on citizens in terms of time, while I think it also can be quite good. My argument is not tied to that. It's not necessary.
Okay. Yes, it made me think about it in some sense, as you have this journey of citizens who are deciding on policy, but indeed, I mean, that would be direct democracy would be, like, of course, a bigger framework. No, it would really touch upon all possible issues that a society is involved with. But since we are here and since you have a PhD in government, I was also interested in a broader question than that, because I think your expertise could be valuable to have an answer in this curiosity. So it seems to me that there exists a kind of negative correlation between the degree of democratism of a country and its size. If we think about historical evidence about direct democracies, we see that they worked quite well in the small Greek states, for example, Athens and Sparta, or in the Swiss cantons in the Middle Ages, and still in some sense up to now. Liberal democracies are instead the product of mid-sized European states. But except for the US, I mean, the biggest political entities in history that we have known were, in fact, autocratic empires. So there was one person deciding for everybody, basically. So what is your perspective about the future of people and representations in a world that is increasingly competing with non-democratic regimes and that is increasingly connected in different cultural landscapes?
That is a big question. So on the question about the size of a country, I would also mention that India, the world's second biggest country, has been democratic and an exemplary democracy. So maybe studying big countries that are democratic could give us some insights for how to make it work. But in terms of your broader question about the challenges of democracy in this age and the problem of representation, as you put it, I think, so I would say there are two different kinds of corruptions of representation that we have to watch out for. Whether we'll be successful in minimizing their effect is a different question. But one is the kind of populist mode of representation in a single national leader, the kind of representing of a whole in the person of one leader. And the second is the more technocratic representation through rational scientific decision making, reducing political conflicts into things that could be resolved just by expertise, which is of course what I'm interested in arguing against. And I think both of these modes are quite prevalent. And in response to these, what democratic countries can do is probably to shore up properly representative or political representative mechanisms through reinvigorating parties and parliaments. And I'm not saying that's easy or that I have a recipe for how to do it, but just pointing out ways in which parties can maybe rethink themselves and offer more compelling frameworks for broader coalitions of voters, especially alienated ones. And the other is to maybe focus on the kinds of more direct mechanisms of participation that bring citizens into policy, into politics directly, citizen assemblies and juries, a science court, these kinds of mechanisms, which seem to be popular among citizens in countries where they've been tried, but they haven't been extremely influential in politics so far. So I can't say whether there's cause for optimism or pessimism, but I think these are the challenges that need to be overcome, and the way to overcome them is to really rethink this crisis of representation. But these are very hard challenges.
Yeah, and of course, when it comes to science and using science to enhance democracy, what is really important there is that, of course, that there should be some form of public funding to have clearly unbiased scientists. So another salient aspect of your research is exactly to stress this need for public spending on science. You have an approach in your papers that stays between Vannevan's Bush's idea of funding useful projects based on technical definition of a common good, and John Rawls' argument that funding should instead entirely reflect public preferences. But let's just consider a real world example. So in Europe, we have what is called the ERC, the European Research Grants, that are financed by the Union across each field of science. And then they are made so that each project is evaluated by one of 27 panels. These panels have up to 16 experts. And then they also circulate the projects externally to peer reviewers. Would you add representation of ordinary citizens within these panels, such as it happens, for example, in musical contests, where we see that in the end, the winner is declared by a weighted average of the technical jury and the popular vote? And if yes, why should do we so?
That's great. I'm imagining a Eurovision for science funding or something. I think I'll say no. So I wouldn't argue, or I don't end up arguing for ordinary citizens to sit on panels and decide. And the one reason is that these grant proposals are quite technical, and there's probably a good reason for that level of new science to be technical. So ordinary citizens may not be any different than random, maybe worse than random. And the other issue is that there's a lot of uncertainty about the direction of science. And my argument actually supports injecting more aspects of randomization, so lotteries, into the system. There are already some critiques of peer review in grant distribution. One of the reasons that concerns me is that it can prevent sufficient diversity and innovative ideas in science by pressuring people to cater to existing paradigms and approaches and funding things that maybe are small extensions of existing approaches. And that ends up limiting the field of possibilities you get for use in policy. The advantage of randomization is that it gives more chance to proposals that go against the grain. It basically equalizes everyone's chances, and that increases the, relatively speaking, the chance of a more minority or dissenting view to get funding. So I'm attracted to this idea. I can't say I know exactly what the empirical consequences would be if it were tried out. So I wouldn't completely revolutionize all funding systems, but start small and then see what happens. But I think this would be a way to realize the aims that I set out rather than having ordinary citizens voting.
Okay, okay, that was a very interesting talk. Thanks a lot, Zeynep.
Thank
And
you so much.
we really hope you to see you in Florence soon when the possibility of traveling resumes.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation, for your excellent questions. This was a really enjoyable conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.